It's Lisa from Been There, Got Out. I am thrilled to have Dawn Brauer back. We've done several interviews together, and it's been quite a while since we've been together. And hopefully, she'll show up any moment. I know she's just got off work. Oh, she's saying she's waiting to see the live on Instagram. Well, if she doesn't see it in a minute, because she just texted me, I'm going to start this all over again because I'm not sure why she doesn't see it. But anyway, she is an attachment expert. She is known as Secure Babies on Instagram. There she is. Oh, I hear a phone ringing. Hopefully that means that you're about to appear. But we're going to be talking about worked. I'm always thrilled when it works. So good to see you.
Thank you.
So I was just saying that we've done a few of these, and I haven't seen you in a while, but you have this really fascinating background. Some of it has to do with babies, the secure attachment, but then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. And one thing I love about you, Dawn, besides your personality, is that you are such an avid reader and researcher. And every time we get, because we're both New Yorkers, every time we have a live conversation, we both talk a lot and we talk really fast. And we're both very passionate about what we talk about. So you want to first introduce yourself quickly? Because I know someone earlier was asking, how is she an expert in this? I was like, we could talk about that tonight.
Yes, and I think they say that, if you do 10,000 hours of study on a particular topic, that you can be considered an expert. And I'm just, so that's, I'm not claiming to be a professional, but I feel like I'm well read, and I just constantly learn on YouTube, about particular topics that we'll be discussing, and life experience, which kind of makes you a little bit of an expert with lived experience. But I'm a pediatric physical therapist, and that's what I've done. I've got a degree in that. So I've been doing that for 25 years, and I work in early intervention, birth through 3. And I have learned, due to my personal experience, about adverse childhood experiences, and just different psychology, personalities, and dynamics in relationships. Parental alienation is a topic that I'm interested in. And, I mostly treat babies, but I'm trying to incorporate into my treating the babies, teaching parents how to create what's called a secure attachment. So a secure attachment is really, I want to say, like an inoculation. It doesn't prevent something from happening. Like, you're going to have you have a secure attachment, and they've done studies on people with PTSD, and generally out of 100, let's say, soldiers that come back with from the war, they say, I think it's 20% that would come back with PTSD, and that what they found is those who've had a secure attachment is really what was that booster that to really help keep them grounded and realize that this event doesn't have to take me out, or really significantly affect me. It creates resilience.
Yeah.
Resilience isn't hardwired, as many people like to believe when they say, like, oh, children are resilient. Yeah, that's true, but they're modeled resiliency. They're taught how to be resilient. So anyway, so that's, I just try to incorporate my life experience, my passion, with working with babies, and I'm forever a student learning about things.
Yes. Okay. So, obviously what we do is help people dealing with toxic relationships, high conflict, divorce and separation, custody battles more than anything, and co-parenting hell do as well as they can in family court and beyond. And one of the things that we focus on is what we call legal abuse. And that's where somebody weaponizes the legal system to continue to financially decimate a person. We always say they try to wear you down and bleed you dry, that you give up. And so part of post-separation abuse, which includes legal abuse, is they don't have that day-to-day interaction with you anymore. So they're limited, and I say this all the time, to 3 things: money, kids, and the courts. So money and the courts go together, but kids last the longest. And so what we see happening in our community and with so many of our clients are people whose abusive exes have separated, and they are now trying to turn the kids against these loving parents as a way to punish them for the end of the relationship. And we often talk about how it's like that same black and white thinking that you see with abusers. You're with me or against me. So if you love me, one parent, that means you have to reject and or discard the other parent. And the child is stuck in the middle, and they're just sort of figuring out, like, how do I survive in a situation where I'm stuck going back and forth? One of my parents really hates the other parent, and I will be punished if I show any affection or any interest in having a bond with that other parent. And so I wanted to talk about that today because Chris and I, believe that this is a form of domestic violence as well as a form of child abuse, but there are groups out there who say, whatever you want to call it, parental alienation, coercive control, abuse by proxy, poisoning the well, they're saying that this doesn't exist, which is astonishing because we are only dealing with the domestic violence community. And next to legal abuse, or as part of legal abuse, it is the number one thing that we hear people are suffering with. My ex is turning the kids against me. I've been a healthy, loving parent, and I feel like I don't know what to do.
Yeah, it's very overwhelming. It's very it's emotionally excruciating. I also feel that it's not even just about the one parent or the child wanting to survive in the environment because they're afraid of repercussions. We've heard of terms like Stockholm syndrome, where the hostage, if you will, the metaphorical hostage, identifies with the abuser because the abuser appears powerful. So it could also be that child is trying to identify an ally with the stronger parent. So
Mm,
just because so many different times it can, because the issue with what I learned, like about, let's say, personality disorders, is that they don't fit in a box necessarily.
mhm,
Like sometimes I'm like, oh, this seems consistent with what I'm seeing, but yet, it's different than this person's experience. And because everybody's so different, different brains, different childhood traumas, you can have like siblings in the same family and have different experiences too, depending on the birth order or depending on the marital situation at the time. There's so many differences. So it's not even just about not wanting to face repercussions, but about wanting to, you know, enmesh, right? We're dealing with emotional enmeshment and mesh. And the, what I want to dabble more in to learn is about brainwashing and cults, because that is what the narcissistic dynamic family system is. It's about brainwashing. So these kids aren't necessarily being threatened, like you need to do this. What's sicker, if you will, more covert, is that these children actually think they're making these decisions for the benefit of themselves, that they don't want to be around that parent. So, and it's so subtle. It doesn't have to be completely obvious. It could be something as simple as getting attention from the abusive parent or the alienating parent. Like, oh, what happened this weekend? Oh, you had this taken away from you. Like natural parenting. Here, what's frustrating is that what you think are good qualities in yourself or good parenting skills, or literally like we're in an alternate universe, shifted to be like pushed back on you. Like your superpower is being used against you violently. So good parenting strategies, for example, maybe you have your child on Life 360 because you just want to see, like, they're starting to drive in cars and you want to see where they're going. You're not spying on them regularly, but that can be told to the child, obviously told to the child, or covertly told to the child that we're being controlling.
mhm.
So natural things that you would do as a parent are completely shifted and distorted.
I'm
And
thinking discipline when you're talking about that. Like often in our world, one of the parents uh, will, when I say discipline, I'm not talking about punish. I'm talking about just teaching like appropriate social behavior, how to manage yourself, boundaries. But with certain ages, especially with teens, 14 seems to be the number
mm,
where things really blow up in our world. But a 14-year-old will say, I don't want to listen to this one parent, and this other parent lets me do what I want. So I can get away with more here. And then you just being a disciplinarian, like just trying to teach them consequences for bad behavior, gets weaponized against you.
Weaponized. So many things get weaponized against you as a person. Being forgiving, being empathic, being caring. Those were things. Those were traits turned against us, if you will. You know, for how you were handling situations that when you look back, you see how things were covertly abusive. You didn't know that then because you were explaining things away. But when it comes to the kids, it's unfortunate. Like you're walking on eggshells to do right by your kids, to parent them, and to hold them accountable and model, respect. And again, we're not talking about corporal punishment. We're
Right.
not talking. But yeah, and then so that's a key thing, and this is where I want to figure out, like, there has to be. I know they talk about red flags of parental alienation versus parental estrangement,
Mm-hmm.
because there are legitimately kids that are being abused, whether physically, sexually, whatever. And those kids genuinely do not want to be in the presence of the abuser. And that's why there's such turmoil about the phrasing of the word, because
Right.
those people that are legitimately abusers are using that term, clearly gaslighting everybody, saying, "Oh, they're being, parental alienation," and I get that, but I feel like we need to take the phrase back and really come back with like some type of like data or empirically based information to say, look, this is parental alienation, not estrangement. And one thing specifically for parental alienation is you can have an abused child, they will still defend that parents, right? If they're abused, they want to be with both parents. Children are hardwired to attach to both parents, love both their parents. When there's parental alienation at foot, it's because they idealize one parent and they hate, contempt for the other parent. And this is all different ages. And when you ask why do you hate mommy or why do you hate daddy? They may say something so silly as, "Oh, they don't smell good," or, "They didn't let me have a donut for dinner." They
Right.
don't give legitimate answers. They give, either something that they were led to believe or in their like age appropriate or developmental stage, what they think is like, a hateful parent, I should hate them because of this. But it's that's what's mind blowing, is that you're frustrated because your child hates you and you don't know why. You can't explain it. They can't explain it. But there's literally just this huge chasm between you, and it's one of the most infuriating, and a term that I've been using. I'm looking to see if it even exists, like chronic injustice.
Ooh.
Chronic injustice. You're constantly there's injustice in the courts. There's injustice within dynamics of family and friends, and it just weighs on you. You're just so tired.
Right.
So,
Actually, the injustice, like we know that with legal abuse, like going through the court process. Oh, sorry, I'm getting cough. Going through the court process, all these years, I used to wake up with this feeling, and then I found it in writing that it's affiliated with legal abuse as rage, injustice, and despair. And it's the same kinds of feelings, like how can this be happening? Like I can't, like you're just almost, I would want to add astonishment.
mm,
Like never thought something like this could happen, especially with a child that we were really, really close for a long time. And then when we split, but my ex and I split, then what happened? By the way, there's a comment here I want to just mention to you, Dawn, in case you don't see it. It says, my
yep.
son is going through this and more with his son. Um, he hasn't gotten his parenting time in 7 months. Before that, he got him twice in 9 months, been to court 3 times, and nothing happened. So sad.
It's so sad. And the courts, with their in the child's best interest, I just we all have to speak. We have to talk for the kids that are going through it now. You know, my kids are older. I'm grateful for that. That they're older. But like for the babies, the ones that are they just don't, when they're in a toxic environment, if they're being withheld from, let's say, a safe parent, their brains are shaping. They're vulnerable to the environment, and that's a fact. That's adverse childhood experiences literally shapes anatomical structures and what do you call it? Just like personality and coping strategies. So, and that's, where secure attachment comes in, and why I'm such a big advocate for knowing this. We're not given a manual when a baby is born. And I wish that, and I hope as education is so prominent on YouTube and Instagram, there's so much great information out there and support groups that we just have to advocate. I know I've passed along to like the Anti-Alienation Project. Her
Yeah.
name is Maddie, and I just latched on because it gives me hope in the sense that I think she's mid to late 20-year-old, and she's taking tours of colleges, trying to, spread the awareness of what, parental alienation is,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
there's
So now
hope.
before you talked about enmeshment, emotional enmeshment, and we often talk about the preferred parent, like the alienating parent versus the target parent. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, what emotional enmeshment looks like, especially with a parent, like an abusive parent?
Yeah, and it depends on the age again. Like you're, as a parent, and I know this is probably a hot debate too. You're not supposed to be your child's friend. You're not. How about this? Because I posted this on an Instagram. They said that they were like, "Oh, you should be their friend. You should be there for them." And I just wanted to express, like, there's a difference between being your child's friend, slash peer. I think you should have the same dynamics that a friend would give, like always having your friend's back, always being there to cheer your friend up. If your friend needs you at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're there for them, but not being their peer. So, emotional enmeshment, also known as emotional incest, is when the child is the parent's therapist, or the child is taking the role of the spouse or the ex-spouse, or the child is the one that's listening to the parent and trying to shoulder the burdens of the emotional burdens of that parent. Or parentification can come along in there, where they're the ones doing the household chores and picking up the slack. So emotional enmeshment is not healthy at all for the child. It doesn't allow the child to what's called individuate. Children, and that's why the teenage years are so hard, they butt up against us because they're literally, picture your fuse together from when they're babies. They literally need to pull themselves apart to individuate so that they can make their own decisions and they can be their own person and they have self-esteem. And if you hear what happens a lot with individuals that suffer from narcissistic families or family dynamics, they can't make decisions on their own, or they're always looking to that parent to tell them if what they're doing is right. It's like they're one organism and they need to be on their own.
Right. Actually, as you're saying that, I'm a note taker, so I started jotting things down. But looking at the factors for when somebody is doing that kind of behavior, making that child, trying to push the child away from another parent, part of that includes making the child dependent on them
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, where a child feels like they can't make their own decisions, or when they're thinking about doing something, they have to check with that parent even if they're with the other parent. It's also a way of undermining the other
Mm-hmm.
parent's authority, because it's like, oh, well, I'm the real parent and I'm the one that makes the rules. So even if that other parent says that this is okay, you still need to check with me.
Mm-hmm.
And kids who grew up with this, I mean, you think about like the people pleasing behaviors that kids in these situations learn, like, what do I have to do to appease this person? You talked about emotional incest. And being like enmeshed together, it's like they learn, like, what do I do? And that's what becomes normal to them in terms of the dynamic in their own relationships. So kids who grew up with this often are drawn to people who do the same things, and then their romantic lives, they think
Well,
that's my role. I'm supposed to be the parent, even when we're peers, or I'm supposed to be the
mm-hmm.
caretaker. Or
And that's a big thing with why I'm so passionate about secure attachment, because there's a phrase called repetition compulsion. I don't know if you're familiar with
no,
that term.
Oh, I
Rep-
always learn from you, Dawn. I'm always like, I got to make sure I get this.
Repetition compulsion is when you have unfinished business with one or both of your parents. We pick partners based on that. So that is why it is very common if you had a narcissistic parent, you're picking out a narcissistic partner. The reason we do that is to change the ending. So that we say, oh, okay, like we just wanted our parents to see us and validate us and love us for who we are. Well, guess what we're picking in a partner? We're picking people that are emotionally unavailable because we got to dance on our head. So then that way we can get their validation because we didn't get it the first time around. I always
Yeah.
think of you, this makes me laugh every time because it's like such a perfect example. Every time I watch Star Wars, when Anakin goes to the dark side and he's right in front of Mace Windu, and then you have Dooku, I forget his name, but you have the Chancellor or Palpatine, saying, do it, like go to the dark side. And there's always that moment where you're like, you could change your trajectory. Please don't do it. And that's what it's kind of like. Like you're setting yourself up to try to redo what happened back then at that point in time. So you're picking partners to try to right the wrongs that happened when you were young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, repetition compulsion.
Yeah.
That's a new one.
There's a great book if anybody's interested in like how we pick people. It's called Attached by Levine. Something else, Shay maybe, but it's called Attached, and it's a. I'll email it. I'll text it to you. It's a great book to help you understand about the different types of personality types. Avoidant, we have anxious, we have secure attached, and we have disorganized, and that's we and you can also have like a blend of both, but it really when you have the avoidant and the anxious in a relationship, that's where that love bombing trauma abuse cycle happens because someone pushes you away and then you like chase after them. It's like that push pull dynamic.
Hmm. Yeah.
But that's where we're creating that's why too with secure attachment, I want to give my kids and teach parents to give their kids the best shot at a healthy relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing that you had sent me, I know, Dawn, you always send me lots of links to stuff, but you said there was one, and I don't think I had a chance to watch that video, but it was how the toxic parent, the abusive parent, presents with the 4 C's
Mm,
as they are cool, calm, charming, and convincing. And the targeted
the
parent is
A's.
A's, anxious, agitated, angry, and afraid. Do you want to get into that a little bit and how that affects the brainwashing of the child?
Yeah, well, I mean, just even think about, the brainwashing of the court system. When you feel that something unjust is happening and you're being pushed and prodded, that's called reactive abuse. Now, let's be real. If I saw somebody unhinged outside of a store, I'm going to think they're a whack job.
Right.
But the reality is we don't know what happened before, what triggers. And there's something called dog whistling. I don't know if you know dog
No,
whistling.
Dawn,
Well,
just
just
throw
keep
these
throwing them
terms
out.
at me.
I read a lot. That's why I feel like I can speak about this, even though I didn't go to school for it. But dog whistling is when a narcissist or an abuser says something that the targeted person knows is like a direct attack or like a jab, and then they have an unhinged reaction in like a group setting. So that might happen in court, where there's like a dog whistle. Maybe even the lawyer says something and it just triggers the targeted person. And emotional regulation is so huge in this community to really work on because we it's like Olympic training, you
It
know,
is.
it's
It,
Olympic training. So we have to really hone ourselves, be mindful. Mindfulness and emotional regulation is a muscle. It is not something you earn once and have it
I,
forever. It's something you have to hone.
I know. As you're saying this, I'm like, that is one thing that we work on with our clients all the time. We call it presentation. And we say our clients, just like you described, in the courtroom, they are terrified, anxious, overwhelmed, and a mess. And they're being bullied by opposing counsel a lot of the time. And so they don't present very well. And often they're up against a pathological liar,
Oh,
manipulative con artist who is not only doing well in court, but getting off on it. They
mm-hmm.
love this because they have a whole new stage and a whole new audience of professionals to try to manipulate, and they don't have a conscience. So they don't really
Yeah,
care.
there's no
So our
remorse.
clients are the ones who are just like a mess and not presenting well. And like you said, when you see someone who appears unhinged, at least in court, people tend not to really believe them and not to listen. So our goal is to make them as calm as possible. And I always say, not by saying calm down because that's inflammatory, but by helping them stay really focused and organized. Because when you know what to expect, you know you're going to be attacked, you know you're going to be bullied, you can prepare properly for dealing with it. And then that's calming. It's the surprises. People are always like, I can't believe the other side lied. I can't believe
It's
that
almost
person's
like
attorney started saying these things.
expect the unexpected.
Right.
Right?
Expect the expected, because it's actually very,
It is very typical. Yes,
right.
correct.
It's very
Expect the
predictable. It's
unexpected.
their lawyer's behavior is predictable. Their behavior is I mean, there's a range of things that they can do, but we know, like Chris made his own little narcissist playbook with the design on the front that's like, it's very predictable, and that's why there's things to not be afraid of. Like when we know it's gonna, like people we talk to, they're like, I didn't know. It's like, but we know because we see this all the time.
Right.
And so that's why it's so important in terms of self-regulation is to connect with people who do see it a lot and do understand it and can prepare you
I
on what
almost
to
feel,
expect.
I'm sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
didn't mean to. No, I was
No, go
gonna
ahead.
say, like, I almost feel like with clients, like if they almost had, you know, like monthly or weekly, like emotional regulation training. You know, if they would commit to training, because champions are made in practice; they're not made in the game.
Right.
So you can't practice emotional regulation, right before a court, session or whatever. You have to do it at all those other times. And the benefit of you becoming emotionally regulated, not only to help with your court proceedings and that, but you're modeling emotional regulation for your child. So there's
Right.
so many benefits for to have to learn about emotional regulation and strategies for emotional regulation. So
Yeah. And again,
yeah.
in and out of court. So court, you present
Mm-hmm.
better, you're more persuasive. Out of court, you're modeling stuff for your kids, you're able to co-regulate for your kids,
Co-regulate.
help them process their experience and the world. So back to the thing with parents who are weaponizing the kids during this process, what can we do when we see it happening? Like, let's say with really little kids, kids come back and say, the other parent said this about you, and I'm triggered. I can't believe that my child is basically repeating something. What do parents in this situation do when they are, it's almost like, well, we say abuse by proxy.
Yeah, you
Their
feel like
anger
you're
is being channeled through the child.
yeah, the words are coming right out the mouth and you're totally
Right?
triggered.
You're like, I got away from this, and now I'm dealing with this child who's like making me feel those same awful feelings.
And who you feel is being put in the middle of the crosshairs, who is now like the human shield of, like they're the first front line, because you're with them now. You know what I mean? Like it's like they're being put in such an awkward position by the other parent. So what can you do? Well, like one thing is you don't necessarily engage. Optimally, you want to keep the relationship between the other parent and the child. Like you have to respect that a child, it's in their best interest to be able to love both parents. It just is. They're 50% you and 50% them. And if you knock the other parent, you just feel that the child feels like you're knocking me from somebody that they love.
And they
So you really
might rush to defend the other parent.
Oh yeah. Which is kind of what the other parent wants you to fall
Right.
into, which is like a reactive abuse, because it's like, and I dealt with an experience like that where it was just so obvious. My reactive abuse, my reaction was so typical and actually very appropriate for what was happening. In that scenario, they're like little spies. They go back,
Right.
and then that parent is like, "Oh, see." And then what happens is it's so crazy, the shape shifting that takes place. You, the safe parent, looks like the predator. So
Right.
of course they ally with the other parent because they're the one protecting them from the predator. So
Right. It
And
is really twisted.
very twisted. And depending on the age, like teenagers, you're butting heads with to begin with little ones, if you blow up, that's scary for them. And they're in a very tumultuous time too. Everybody's got like emotions, happening like right on the, on their sleeve. It's right under the surface, always there. So I always try to work on myself, right? Try to contain that emotional regulation so that I'm not having an explosive reaction. So that I highly recommend doing. I also recommend documenting, not in that moment, documenting exactly what was said, when it was said, and maybe even, did they just come off a visit? Are they going to a visit? Did they just come off a call? Because you're kind of putting context. Like I always found that the weekends at the end of the weekend, I, there was always like, it was like this,
Right.
so I'll just leave, go to Barnes and Noble, just kind of compose myself, let them assimilate back into, this environment. So I'm just saying it gives like a good picture. I'm very big with documentation because I'm hoping as time goes on, we can prove parental alienation more and more. And it would be like so good to have data for these professionals to be like, well, look, see, this is when the behaviors occur, and look, it's coinciding with this. Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
good.
for sure. I mean, there are like what we've started doing is there are, think we call them the alienation factors, because in our world, a lot of times the targeted parent gets accused of parental alienation when the other person is actually doing it. And then our clients will say, oh my gosh, my ex has hired a parental alien expert and accusing me of it. I'm really, really scared that I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
lose custody. So I think it's really important for people to understand what the courts consider alienation, whatever words you want to
Mm-hmm.
use to make sure that you're not inadvertently doing it. So, for example, one of the factors is blocking contact and communication. Now, everyone's like, oh, I would never do that. But if my child is sick and they're in bed and they don't want to go to the other parent's house, then I'm not going to make them go.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can get hurt in court for that. You can be found in contempt perhaps for
Mm-hmm.
that because if someone else has access time, and I'm saying this after interviewing attorneys on this topic, this is not just my personal opinion. If that person has parenting time and your child can get out of bed and go with them, if you withhold that access time, you are
Mm.
actually blocking contact and communication. So you don't want to do that. And that's why it's so important to understand what those factors are.
Right.
And also, like you said, in terms of documentation, we want our people to understand what it means so that they know they're not doing it, but also to start building a case against someone who is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So, some of the things like we did this whole thing on how people send poisonous messages about the other parent. And one of the things I call the 3 U's is they try to make the target parent seem unsafe,
Mm-hmm.
unloving, and unavailable. And there's so many ways to do that, especially covertly, where it's not just saying it
Overtly
straight out.
is
Yeah.
brainwashing. And I'm going to make it a point because here's the other thing, even as the kids get older, and I love this, I sent this to you in a text. We can't tell somebody, even with adults of explaining the situation, we can't tell somebody, what's happening, that they're being abused. They have to see it for themselves. And it's so true. It's so true. Somebody can tell you, you can be, and I think Maddie talks about that too, in her, like her story, where her dad, I think, tried to say what was happening, and at the time she wasn't ready to hear it, and then so many years, decades might have gone by, and she had an aha moment. So it's not like the dad just kept drilling it. It makes it worse. And when it comes to cult deprogramming, I believe, from what I understand about it, you're not supposed to kind of go in and be like, oh, you were in a cult and this happened. You actually have to, like, very gently, kind of like almost, be a safe base for them, just make them feel safe and that they're okay and that you're trustworthy. And it's the same, I think it's the same thing. We can't just go like gangbusters trying to like scream from the rooftops what's happening. It is such a patience game. I keep reminding myself I'm playing the long game. I'm not playing the short game. It's a long game. And I'm just, hope is very important to have hope, that maybe there'll be an aha moment, maybe the tide will turn in your favor, but trying to beat into them that something's happening is actually going to push them further away.
Right.
And that is
Right.
so hard.
Right. I mean, you think about comparing it to us as adults when we were in those abusive relationships. If somebody started telling us, you shouldn't be with that person, they're an abuser, it has the opposite effect because often we move closer to the abuser and the abuser says, oh, see that person saying terrible things about us, about me, and you trust me, and then they isolate you even more.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing can happen and worse with children because children are dependent. So they don't even have the ability to like move out like we did. They're
Nope.
stuck going back and forth and they have to basically survive. The other thing that I'm thinking that's really important for kids in this situation is, and me being a former high school English teacher, is how important it is to help kids develop critical thinking skills
Mm-hmm.
about like if and in this webinar that I did on this topic recently, I talk about how if the preferred parent or the alienating parent is telling kid, this is how your other parent is, like this is how they are. They come to you and they say, oh, that parent said this terrible thing about you. And then you say, no, that's not what it is. You're basically doing the same thing because they're telling the child or teenager, this is what you should think because I'm telling you and I'm your parent. And kids think their parents don't lie. Parents and authorities, they believe them. They come to you and you do the exact same thing. How is it any better? And the kid could shut down and say, nobody's giving me the opportunity to draw my own conclusions. Everybody's just telling me what I'm supposed to believe. So that's not helpful. So what's important, I think, is to be as the target parent to encourage the child and to question the child. What makes you think that? Why do you feel that way? Not just shut them down. You can't just shut them down because that's what they're getting at the other home.
Right. And to make them see that, which is the answer to your question from a few minutes ago, was like if they say something about, you as a parent, you want to be like, oh, well, do you feel that way? Or, to try to just give testimony. Well, like, oh, when don't you feel like when mommy's there, like I come pick you up at school, like you feel like I'm trustworthy. I show like not to make an argument, but to almost like give examples of positive things. You know what I'm saying? Not to fight about it, but and also to be it. Not to argue. You want to show them, that you are what you say you are. About
Right.
being a
Show,
good
don't
parent.
tell.
Right. Exactly. Being trustworthy, or I'm trying to think of an example, but you hit the nail on the head. That was the answer to your question before. That you don't want to tell them what to think, but you want them to kind of come to their own conclusions.
Right.
So yeah. So
Right. I mean, people often also will say, like, what can I do? Like, it's my parenting time. I need this kid to be in my life. And I'm like, we get it. But because it's like a cult and because often these kids have been brainwashed, you can't just demand to have them back in your life. And is that the kind of relationship you want, where you force a child to be in your life? It's going to take time. Like you said, it's a long game. It's going
it
to
is the
take
long
time,
game.
a lot of patience. And unfortunately, for us, this is not something that the courts can generally deal with. The best you can ask for in a court is some kind of therapy to slowly work on the relationship. Often kids are being monitored by a preferred parent, whether they can physically hear them or they just have the sense that somehow the conversation will be overheard and they can't show affection or a willingness to be close to the target parent. So sometimes when there's a really good therapist who can work on establishing that trust and making the child think about things and posing really good questions, that can help. But other than that, what can a court do for you? A court can't fix a relationship, but there's so many things that you as a parent can do outside of the court system. That's something Chris and I are working on more because, like I said, it's one of the biggest issues in our community. And it's not worth it to go to court for things like this sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you can spend so much money and get what?
And I think that just to talk to the point of the whole like debate about the term, there are these reunification. I don't know if we have these in New York, these reunification camps. So
Yeah.
that's kind of why it's also a hostile phrase or whatever, because these camps or just ripping children like it's trauma in and of itself.
Right.
So
And
yeah,
that's that force, like some extreme force, just like when you rip, if someone's brainwashed, like ripping them out of the situation doesn't fix it.
no, no. So it really is for the parent. It is about you getting yourself in a good mental space, in a good physical space, because you were saying before about being emotional in court and how emotional regulation, but not only does being triggered in court set you off, lack of sleep, lack of eating, feeling like you don't have support, financial stress. There's so many different factors that go into these court dates that we really have to feel well to be able to handle our emotional states, if you will.
Yeah. I
So
think,
that's
yeah, I was going to say, I think there's so much guilt around this as well, for not being as great a parent as we want to be. But I always want people to remember that we're in survival mode. All of our people are in survival mode. And
yeah.
so you just do the best you can for now, and you'll do the best you can later, but we can't, it's so unfair. That's part of the injustice. It's like, how can
Hmm.
I be a great parent if I'm consumed with the overwhelm of court and trying to take care of these kids and dealing with this terrorist and everything else? You just do the best you can.
So let me give you a phrase that is, I think, a game changer for parents that are very hard on themselves. It's called the good enough mother, but the good enough parent. Children need a good enough parent. That's it. That's what is that, 51%? And I say that like light with the 51%, but there's no such thing as a perfect parent. A perfect parent is actually probably pathological, right? And a
Right?
neglectful parent is the other
Performing.
extreme. Yeah, the other extreme is a neglectful parent where there's zero effort. So you just want to be good enough, and that's an actual phrase and actually backed on the best type of um, situation, if you will, for a parent to be good enough.
Mm.
That's very true when it comes to secure attachment. You just got to be good enough, and they're going to learn so many valuable lessons in this. They're going to learn about resilience. Like, let's say you're on edge and you snap at your child. That's an opportunity for what's called repair. You have an opportunity to model remorse, accountability, forgiveness to your child. Kids don't learn this stuff except through experiences. So, we're so hard on ourselves. And I can say from experience, I felt like I was losing time, valuable time, wasting my energy on this when I just wanted to be a good enough parent, which luckily I know the phrase, but you feel like you're not being good enough. And you're spending so much time and energy on this whole experience. So just know you just good enough is where it's at, and that's
Yeah.
actually
Yes, and I've heard family court judges like at conferences say, we do not expect perfect parents. Our people are always like terrified. Oh my gosh, I did something wrong. I'm going to get in trouble. They live with this constant sense of dread. But
but I think that
even judges,
but
go ahead.
I'm just gonna say, I think that's because everything is weaponized against us. So
Right.
when I feel like I didn't do something right, like I yelled at my child, and I'm afraid
Right.
they're gonna go back and they're gonna say something, or whatever the case may be, everything is under a microscope.
Right.
So it's such a like a Herculean feat to be this good enough parent when you feel like everything you do is being scrutinized and going to be weaponized to have your children taken away from you. It's it's
Right.
it's it's very challenging. It's very
I mean,
challenging.
it's scarier when the kids are going to go back and report versus the kids are harsher than the
Mhm.
judges, because the judge is not going to care about some of the stuff that your child cares about and reports back.
Yeah.
So Dawn, the other thing that you said earlier is about resilience. You said kids are not born with resilience. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so often I get frustrated because I hear all the time children are resilient. And what I find is a lot of times it's the adult justifying a poor decision they want to make at the expense of the child. So it's an excuse. So when I hear that phrase, I get very up in arms. What resilience is the child to be able to handle microdosing of stress so that like when something big happens, it's like they've had all these little experiences, but they're not hardwired with that. They're learning that from experiences like, if you blow up and then you apologize. Well, they felt the stress They felt like abandoned, right, in that moment, but then you come back, and it's about building trust and building the rapport that you're the safe base and you're consistent. You're consistently coming back, and there's no conditions to you coming back. It's not performative. It's not based on how you're treating them. You are like their rock. So
Mhm.
resilience is so important because you know what's going on in the world, however, nobody, I feel like nobody, a lot of people don't have resilience. People want emojis removed because they're offended, by this. And you're like, well, we're not going to, the world doesn't work like that. You're going to be bombarded with things that you can't tolerate or you don't agree with. The trick is learning how to let it roll off your back and not taking it in so that you're ready to, like, look at all the gun violence that's happening. I'm afraid to go into the bank or go into like somewhere, not it's not significant that I'm not doing it, but like in the back of my head, you don't know if somebody's going to snap because they're not resilient. They take so much stress, and the way they like do this like big answer, response, when it's really just about accepting stress and being able to handle it and move forward and move past it, not to let it like consume you. Like a consuming rage, over little stressors that add up, and then it's like a cumulative effect.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I think it is important, like, even though our kids have to deal with a very difficult parent often, like, them learn, there are things you can do to help them learn to deal with it. There's all kinds of support and resources. And a lot of times people will say, oh, well, I need to get more custody because I'm so afraid of my kid being with this other
Mm,
parent. Even if you get a huge amount of custody, it's nearly impossible. It's really hard to completely strip someone of their parental rights. So when the kid is with that other parent, how do they cope? Like, you can
mm,
help teach your child coping skills to get through that, because when they go out in the world, this is their first
mhm,
practice. They go
mhm,
out in the world, there's going to be a lot of difficult people that they're going to have to learn to navigate. So it's fortunate and unfortunate. We always say that kids in these situations have to grow up faster because they have to learn to establish boundaries, often with their own
oh,
parents.
absolutely. And just like for some strategies, I'm a big believer in, like helping the child, depending on the age, to feel that you're with them even when you're not there with them. So like for little ones, they may need, like, for example, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like there's a bear with a heartbeat
Mhm.
that's supposed to help them sleep. I don't know if you've seen it on Instagram.
My son got one of those. He's 24, but someone
The
gave him
heartbeat.
one with the heartbeat with the sound. Yeah.
Right, but what if the safe parent says, like, oh, when you go to bed at night, I want you to know that when this bear's heart is beating, mommy's heart is, or daddy, either one,
Yeah.
is beating, and I want you to, like, and then that you don't have to tell anybody else. It's just like a bear that they have with a heartbeat, and then that child, especially when they're falling asleep, because you don't want their little brain marinating in stress as they're drifting off. This is a whole nother topic, but that point, that window between drifting off and waking in the morning are two critical periods for the subconscious. So we
Really?
don't want them for, yes, and birth through 7 years of age, brains, the baby's brains, birth through seven, is cycling in what's called a theta wave pattern, which is similar to hypnosis. So when people don't think that children are listening and paying attention, all the issues that we have as adults most likely were programmed from birth through seven, and we don't realize. That's why I was a big believer in, like, watching what we put on our kids. Like, I didn't want my daughter to have a shirt that said drama queen. I didn't
Hmm.
want it to manifest like that. Like, I would put empowering sayings around my house, so it was like a 3D vision board, so that they were always being fed with positive messages or music, or and I wasn't a helicopter parent, but I did watch what they were. I made sure to screen what they were watching, because again,
Hmm.
it all cycles through. But or they have this light where if you touch the light, and that means, oh, mommy's just saying good night, or daddy is saying good night to me, the light, or there's a ring and a watch.
Yeah.
There's so
Yeah.
many different, we could go through. There's so many, like, I also, what I did was I set up like a travel bag for my son with toothpaste and Benadryl and mouthwash, like, just so that they knew And I would always say, "Do you need anything for your bag?" So when they would just go to brush their teeth, they felt taken care of. Even
Exactly.
if it's
I
not
love that.
consciously, even if it's not consciously, subconsciously, they know I've always got their back. I'm always there for them. And if they need something, just by seeing that, that's just like a reminder.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about the associations
Mhm.
with like, oh, like look at all my stuff is all here. I don't
Right.
have to think about
Yep.
that. And it's not like you need the credit
No.
for it, but they're going to remember who made their nice, just like, even though I'm not a cook, but like people have these wonderful memories of
Mm.
someone who cooked for them when they were younger.
Mhm. Yeah. No, absolutely. And like you said, here's the difference too. I think between a targeted parent and an alienating parent, the targeted parent never needs credit. Doesn't matter. I'm not doing it for credit. I'm not going to my kids' games and cheering aloud so that the whole gym hears me. I'm going to the game and I'm leaving at the end of the game just so that they know I was there. I don't need to have them blatantly look at me and make eye contact so they know I'm there. I'm there for them and then I go. We don't want credit. And I think that that's pretty typical. And I think you can read people and you kind of get an idea like, oh, okay, I see your pattern of behavior. That's like another red flag.
Oh
Just
my
watching
gosh,
for
Dawn,
behavior.
you're making me think of so many, well, the type that we see who does go to kids events,
Hmm.
the parents that make a big deal out of like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm hugging, oh, I'm gonna carry your trophy around, oh, I mean, like you need to sit with
Hmm.
me, like all of that.
Yep,
Very
that's so much
familiar.
pressure on the kids. Or I would never want to be somewhere where I felt my kids felt like they were in the middle. So I would either figure out a different way to be in the background but be there, and maybe they don't even know that I'm there. But I was always thinking like I don't want my kids to feel like they're in this tug of war that they never asked for. They didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for this at all. So how can I make their development as easy as possible? And again, we may not get, and I don't want credit, but they may not connect the dots until they have their own kids. That's a very long time to possibly go before the fog lifts. But at least let's hope that at least at some point it will lift.
Yeah. Yeah. And we always say like you can't give up on your kids because if you do, you're basically confirming the message that an abuser is saying that you didn't care enough to
Which
keep
is
trying.
so hard. That's so hard because I can tell you with my oldest, who's almost 21, and I haven't spoken to him in almost 3 years. So, whatever phrase you want to call it, I don't care. I haven't had a relationship with my son for almost 3 years. I am trying to respect his boundaries. So I'm not necessarily emailing all the time. I just emailed recently once because I felt inspired to do that, but I won't push myself. So it's so hard and it's so specific to each individual situation, but we also have to consider like if they're older, we don't want to make them feel like, well, we don't care what you want. This is what I
Right.
want. I'm going to, even though we know it's the right thing, that what's happening is what's unfair, but I just won't push boundaries because those are his boundaries. And okay, I can just hope that I'm hoping I gave him a secure base, that his secure base will help have him, turn around at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know people, clients as well as personal friends who have kids in their 20s who are living with the abusive parent and it has turned around and who came back and were like, I couldn't talk to you, other parent. I
Mm,
couldn't. And a lot of it had to do with still being very financially dependent
mm,
on that parent because remember, they train them to be dependent on them.
Well, and
So
that's,
there's a
oh, I was going
lot
to give,
involved.
there's another word. I love words. I love
I do
learning.
too. You teach me so much.
Have you heard of infantilization?
Yeah, explain it for the rest of us, but I have.
So infantilization is when a narcissist adult wants to keep whoever under their thumb by treating them like an infant and doing things for them and like depositing their paychecks when they're 30 years old because they can't do it, I'll do it, I do it right, and they're always indebted to them and they treat them like a baby.
Yeah.
So that word is what opened up a can of worms for me to understand a whole host of dynamics that I was involved in. Infantilization. And when I found that word, and that was my aha moment, right? Because before that, I didn't think, I just thought this, this was family issues that I was dealing with. But then I had an aha moment with that word, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And it was literally like a domino effect. Everything just kept falling and falling into place, connecting dots, and everything
Right.
just made sense. So infantilization is a good one and a red flag.
Yes, and it keeps that child, it also provides supply to the
Mm,
parent, especially as the parent is getting older, the child is growing up, and that the more dependent the child is, even as they're getting to be a young adult, the more the alienating or preferred parent still gets to use them.
yes. Yep. Yeah. Use, objectify. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Well, oh my gosh, Dawn. Of course, we've flown through the hour as always. So how can people find you if they want to learn more?
I'm on Instagram at Secure Babies. Anybody if they have questions, which I've had dialogue, over the time, like regarding, questions about secure attachment or, narcissistic dynamics, with their children, on Instagram would probably be the best way.
Okay. At Secure Babies.
Yes, at Secure Babies.
All right, Dawn, always a pleasure. I have like a page full of notes and terms, and I'm so excited to clip it up.
Connect it, right?
And thank you so much again. It's great seeing you.
Oh, you too, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay, bye.